Take a look around the room and see who your Dharma buddies are tonight on the Zoom room and in the meditation hall. Always notice new faces. And will somebody please do a head count in the room for me? Our Zoom head count is 16 participants. How's this sound? Seems like we're doing fine. So welcome, everybody. Insight Meditation Community of Charlotte. My name is Thia, and I'm your Dharma leader for the evening. I'd like to open by inviting you to consider this statement. All of humanity's problems stem from an inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Now, that was written more than 400 years ago by a French philosopher and mathematician named Blaise Pascal. And yet, I believe it still holds a lot of truth today. I also believe that what we just did together may be solving some of humanity's current problems. When we gather and sit quietly in a room, we're working at understanding ourselves, observing ourselves, and getting a little bit more patient, maybe. We're spending time with our own bodies, noticing how it feels to be in a body. We're watching our breath, and hopefully we're encountering some kindness for ourselves, because although this is a simple practice, it's not really that easy. So these are just the few things that happen here regularly, just from coming together to sit when we gather to meditate. So I'm preparing to travel soon to attend an extended retreat that is a push for me. And what is on my mind right now is solitude. There's a beautiful word for this in the Pali language. That word is Viveka. And so tonight, I'd like for us to consider Viveka and this one meaning of solitude or seclusion among the 25 meanings that it has. When I began to look at this word, I realized that this word was in many, many different traditions, Viveka. Now, before you yawn and think, oh my gosh, solitude, really? I invite you to consider how challenging it can be just to sit for a short time and stay true to the intentions of following your breath and scanning your body, or even being able to track the maze of mental states that we have in our head. So I think seclusion matters a lot on the path to contentment and to waking up to reality, getting out of our heads and into our hearts. We all have some moments of seclusion or solitude, no matter how busy we are. We all take a shower, hopefully, and that's a moment of seclusion or solitude. We all drive cars, pretty much, most of us, and that's another time of seclusion. So let's look at this Viveka tonight and see what we can do with it. There's an East Bay Insight meditation teacher named Shayla Catherine who has spent 7 years of her life in seclusion, in silence. She says, seclusion is not a state of alienation or loneliness. The chosen seclusion that supports a meditation practice and a rich life is rooted in clarity and willingness, in knowing what leads to suffering and choosing instead a practice that leads to lasting happiness. And this is from her book, Focused and Fearless. So I'd like to add to that and say, although seclusion doesn't sound very dramatic, we as meditators know the kind of funky stuff that is in our heads and sometimes hearts It can be a real tangle to sit down and go inside sometimes. It can be very dramatic even. This is why sitting quietly is needed. We use solitude to settle the snow globe. We use seclusion to let the muddy water find stillness and clarity. So what the Buddha Dharma teaches about this is ehipassiko. No matter what I say tonight, I invite you to just try it on for yourself, see if it's helpful for you. So some of you might be thinking, when do I have time for solitude? Sometimes even an extended sit once a week feels like a push. But these times, the busy times, are exactly the times when we make an executive decision to prioritize our own well-being. Things will shift. See for yourself. It's almost always when we feel like we don't have the time that we must somehow make the time for solitude. In this sacred time, we can arrange to put down obligations and social and family roles if we're going away like I am on an extended retreat. And this can be especially important for caregivers needing to top up their giving tanks, also for parents, basically for everyone. In seclusion, we're in a safe environment and we start to glean the strong and calm essence that is the true nature of our hearts and minds. This reminds me of the last IMCC retreat we were on, where powerful storms took out the power at the retreat center and for several miles around us. But our group of about 30 retreatants was tucked literally into a stone fortress with everything we needed. We were quietly meditating, unperturbed, and hundreds of candles had been lit for light. It's times like this that we have the experience that we've only heard about in the teachings. Words like deep stillness, vast silence, and luminous heart come to mind. Retreats give us open time to focus and to feel. This is why sometimes on retreat, we begin to laugh or cry for no particular reason. If finally these emotions have a place to rise up. Indian philosopher Krishnamurti speaks to this with an interesting writing. He says, "Those who are inwardly alone, whose minds and hearts are free from the ache of loneliness, they are real people, for they can discover for themselves what reality is, and they can receive that which is timeless." That was written around the 1930s. So I was raised in the Christian tradition, and when I read the Krishnamurti quote, it reminded me of a teaching of Jesus when he was told, there was a big crowd around him, he was told that his family was there to see him, and he replied, "Who are my mothers and brothers?" Initially, this was so puzzling to me when I was younger, but eventually it became clear to me that he was experiencing the dazzling freedom of mind and heart that comes from lots of focused seclusion. This is the kind of freedom that makes the whole world feel like one's mothers and brothers and sisters. So we repeatedly hear of great leaders retreating for solitude, carving it out for themselves in order to make space for and to connect to the greater truths. I need to pause here and clarify that I am not placing myself on the level with Krishnamurti or Jesus. I am, however, emphasizing that the same tools that these leaders used are there for us today, now. Solitude, I believe, is nectar for our parched and overconnected lives. The longer sits on retreat have the potential to move us out of what I call transactional sitting, where we're sitting in order to get something. It moves us into sitting because it's beautiful and we like it and it's bigger than us, and we want to surrender to that energy. Shayla Catherine again writes that there are 3 types of seclusion. The first one is physical solitude, where we just take ourselves away from the sometimes exaggerated responsibility of our routine. We like to think we're indispensable, but most of us are not. And initially, this can even bring separation anxiety because we are so used in our conditioning to our tasks telling us who we are. Most people need some degree of periodic physical solitude in order to calm an anxious heart and quiet our distracted minds. The second kind of solitude is mental solitude. And so this describes the coolness of mind that comes to the meditator as it finds a place to rest. This mind is now free to abide in a deepening, peaceful state. We have less distractions, hopefully less cravings. And I've personally found it takes almost 3 or 4 days of meditating for me to begin to slip into this coolness of mind, to surrender my go, go, go pace. And then the third kind of seclusion is liberation or detachment. And this is where we are suspended from normal thinking. It can kind of sound scary if we're very attached to our thinking mind and not used to being without it. However, once we trust the goodness here, luminous mind can come and deep states of natural awareness accompany it. Finally, here, for at least a short time, we're no longer comparing, remembering, planning, strategizing. All of that mental proliferation temporarily falls away. Here, we're just abiding as stillness. So these different kinds of solitude or viveka correlate with another teacher, Adyashanti's directions for meditation. He says the 3 most important things for meditation are stillness, which is taking yourself out of the game, taking yourself away; acceptance, adjusting your mental attitude from reactive to receptive; and then resting as awareness. This is the liberation piece. And note the distinction here. He says not resting in awareness, but resting as awareness. So these deepest parts of seclusion can be a different experience. If you're not ready for it, it can feel scary. I've experienced that as well. This usually means we need to maybe pause the practice. Maybe we're trying too hard, going too fast. Slow down a bit, check in with a colleague or a teacher. This is also another reason why we meditate every single day, so that we get used to these states and we sort of titrate ourselves. So it comes in little bits. Prepare ourselves to be familiar with letting go. Everyone does this at a completely different pace. It's not so helpful to compare where you are in your practice with others. Comparing mine almost always steals the joy from the practice. So this is where the saying, you do you, really applies. Then, as these are not abiding states, unless we've reached nibbana, which is an abiding state, our old good friend, the planning mind, snaps right back eagerly into its place at the very first opportunity. This is another reason that we meditate regularly, so that we can create conditions that reduce the mind's ability to keep claiming those old patterns so quickly. We keep shaking that up, and we create agency over our own mind. We're able to see more quickly when we're lost in a rabbit hole of what I call stinking thinking, and to come up and out and see the big picture again. Once more, a few thoughts about seclusion. It's not always a positive state. Sometimes when we sit alone, we find that we're stewing in anger or simmering in hurt or resentment or sinking into sadness. Replaying these stories of being wronged or treated badly, imagining the worst, only reinforces these negative things. With mind training, we can learn to reframe, literally recognize or recognize this, and hope to let go or forgive or do whatever the next most healing thing is. Often it's directed right at the self when you realize you're caught in that eddy. This is why we practice metta every time we come together. Metta is a loving kindness meditation. Now, because we can't live in seclusion, it's not healthy for most of us, let's look at balance. What's on the flip side of this? The Dharma does tell us that solitude and silence support going deeper in the practice as we wake up to reality, but we also see that it's the day-to-day interactions that really allow us to balance our practice, live into compassion, kindness, and wisdom that the Buddha teaches. To me, it kind of feels like we're pollinated by our engagement with others, that both parties have a chance to bloom or wilt, depending on the interaction. As we work within these various social frameworks like friendships, work colleagues, partners, and family members, because as mammals, we are to some degree social beings, and we thrive on the company of others. Even sitting quietly in a room together is easier than sitting by yourself. It's an interesting phenomenon. Introverts like myself have learned to really appreciate quiet time to balance my outgoing energies with my incoming energies. And so that's different for each person too. There is no right or wrong there. We can also note that a severe punishment in a correctional facility is to remove an inmate from their peers and put them in a period of involuntary seclusion. This is considered a severe punishment. I think that's an interesting thing, and it's often quite effective. I read a simple quote today. It said, "To affect the quality of your day is the highest of arts." And that is Henry David Thoreau. We've all had the day start out great and then go south really quickly. And sometimes we've started out with difficulty and suddenly the day takes a turn for the best. Bless you. As we interact with others, we don't have to be dependent on how they treat us to create our happiness. As a matter of fact, equanimity is a byproduct of this silent time of solitude. And it follows us into our social time. It's like, to me, it feels like an invisible cape of not taking things personally. It really helps me with that. It's one of the best residues of solitude. So it's up to each of us to figure out what the balance is. How much time alone is good for me? And how much time with others? This is an important and a really personal equation, and it changes all the time. Henry Nouwen was a Catholic priest who wrote about the difficult and necessary parts of our spiritual journey. He wrote, "Solitude is the furnace of transformation. Without solitude, we remain victims of our society, and we continue to be entangled in the illusions of a false self." Sounds like he was a Buddhist, but he was a Catholic. So John and I had the joy recently of traveling to the British Virgin Islands. We went somewhere remote. It takes a full day of multiple modes of travel to get there. And on the day after we returned from a week of mostly listening to wind and waves and crickets, we were in the grocery store, and I noticed how slow I felt inside in comparison to all the people whizzing them around me, talking on their phones and throwing groceries into their cart. And I felt my heart smile because I realized I had brought that quiet island time home with me, inside of me. And I felt a slight resistance to getting back up to quote unquote speed. So, balance is checking to see what speed is right for us and at what time. Life all around us continues to get faster, and maybe that's not always the most beneficial thing. So, each person gets to choose this. Let's close tonight by looking at ways to create seclusion in a world that is fast and hyper-connected. The first thing to think about is that concentration and stillness can be developed right here in active social settings. Remember, if you can breathe, you can meditate. So this is a cumulative practice, and if we practice regularly, we can have stillness of mind on a crowded city bus. We can create mental solitude. Many of us devote a part of each morning or afternoon to being quiet and alone. Even a simple walk through the neighborhood, or especially in the woods or in a garden, these are helpful ways to create seclusion for yourself. It's interesting because it's connection and seclusion of the best kind. We can also take advantage of online offerings if we want to bring structure to a home retreat. These are at their best right now with the advent of Zoom. Or book an Airbnb and take a good Dharma book along. Just disappear for a few days. Our IMC residential retreat is a great way to experience Viveka in that stone fortress that I was talking about. Also, we have Southern Dharma Retreat Center near here, and we even have some regional monasteries that welcome folks from all traditions and offer beautiful spaces for contemplation and rejuvenation at really reasonable rates. So what it boils down to is that the place does not matter so much as letting go of projects, distractions, entertainments. Eventually, the exquisite joy arises naturally from a mind that has made friends with seclusion. One last thought. I noticed personally that sometimes I really miss the sense of being needed. And I've even felt fear creep in initially as I first began to practice sitting alone for longer periods. I've discovered that this is good, this is normal. And just to say quietly to myself, this is what letting go feels like. In a study at the University of Virginia, the majority of people preferred to receive an electric shock rather than to sit quietly alone for 15 minutes. This was a large study, so we can see how rare it is to be able to do this and even to learn to enjoy it. So tonight we've talked about why seclusion may be necessary for a richer life experience, how to use seclusion to create a beneficial headspace for yourself in 2023, and how to balance the fullness of life with the nurturing emptiness of solitude. I'll close with Shayla Catherine. We may search for a quiet place to meditate, but true external solitude is not necessary. It may not even exist. I have come to understand solitude as an experience of relationship, specifically our relationship to reality. Lovers of solitude value this relationship, and so give it their time and attention. May it be so.